Why don't we go ahead and get started here. All right, we're going to go live.
Recording in progress.
Excellent. Well, welcome to another Account-Based Friday. We've got a stellar lineup and conversation coming up. The CMO of ZoomInfo, Brian Law, has joined us, and really excited to hear some of the things that he's learned recently at a CMO conference. 40 or so attendees of CMOs with Bain, and he's going to share some unique insights there. But before we do, every week we start off with a poll, and in this week's poll, it was really motivated by someone asking me the question of should we be doing account-based and lead-based, or just go all in on account-based? And my gut told me that a lot of companies were kind of doing both, but it's really a function, I think, of your go-to-market motion and your size of your ICP and who you're targeting. So I kind of lobbied into the try to do both, knowing that it's not a one-size-fits-all. There may be some situations where just doing ABX makes a lot of sense. But Megan, how did you respond to this, or what was your reaction to this poll?
Yeah, I voted only ABX just because that's the reality for the market that I sell into, or the markets that I sell into. We know, the customers that we have in retail and commercial banking and in, different kinds of insurance. And so to me, there isn't a whole lot of sense of doing broad-based demand of any kind when you know exactly who you need to be talking to by name in some case, like in most cases. So it's a highly data-driven strategy that we're building. Because then if I can know everyone in my universe, then it says, okay, so find them, like put them in your database and begin very specific structured marketing outreach to them, both from sales and from marketing. And our product teams of advisors actually get involved in engaging, through that process too, because they're the product essentially. So that's how we're thinking about it. I was surprised that so few people answered the question that way, just because in B2B in general, we know who we should be selling to, and that just says, once you know that, then you can be much more targeted in your investments and in your outreach and in your messaging. But I can understand the desire to sort of split that difference, because there's a lot of pressure still to deliver volume, and it's hard to deliver the numbers that people think are good in a pure ABX strategy. But it's more about changing those expectations, to my mind. But Brian, you know a lot about this, and thank you again so much for joining us today.
Sure.
I would love for you to comment on what you took away from that poll and sort of what occurred to you.
So yeah, I was probably equally fascinated by the split, Meg, as you alluded to. Given the amount of data that is out there, particularly in B2B, there's so much opportunity to be targeted in who you're going after, even if you're targeting individuals at those accounts. We're increasingly seeing across all of our customers that move towards more of an account-based focused, although doing it in a much more scaled way, which is part of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, awesome. And thinking of the scalability, it sounds like you just came off a conference with a bunch of CMOs, and I don't know if that was top of mind, the scalability, but I'm curious, any nuggets that came out of that conversation and that brain trust of kind of what this economic climate that we're in, or anything related to that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it was just wonderful being with so many CMOs and our customers. But I have to say a big thank you to Bain, because they brought a lot of the research that facilitated the conversation. So there were a few things that we thought might be useful sharing. So Bain essentially looked going back to 2007, so a few recessions back, and said, what were some of the key themes that helped companies get through recessions, and what were the things that they didn't do? And so what they found was that ones that took advantage of some of these ideas had a 14% CAGR since 2007, and the ones that didn't essentially stayed flat. So that's pretty significant difference. And so what were some of the things they were not doing before we get into what they were doing? So things they weren't doing. The first one is this idea of burning the furniture. We're concerned about the recession. Let's cut costs, cut our media budget, fire people. That tends to not get you ahead, while it does potentially help with margin. Sort of the second thing is lose the plot. So we don't know what's working. Let's try everything. Let's hope something sticks. And inevitably that dilutes your resources and you can't get anything done. And then the third piece is just freeze, get completely paralyzed with fear. Let's hope an answer comes to us, but we're not going to make a decision now. And as a result, you lose the opportunity to capitalize on the situation. The flip side of what they found companies were doing that enabled them to be successful are a few key things. And actually going back to what Meg said, the foundation of that is data. Companies have to be very, very thoughtful about who are the accounts, who are the individuals that they really need to go after, and then use that as the baseline for their go-to-market efforts. So that's foundational. And then there were sort of three key components that they found drove success. So the first one was really looking at improving your commercial efficacy and how do you get more dollars from every sales rep or every sort of marketing activity, and really doubling down on those. And I'm going to talk about some examples. The second one is really investing in what they call go-to-market plays, and we'll define what that means, but these sort of scalable motions that are targeted and relevant to the accounts that you want to go after. And then the third one is looking for where you can increase margin relative to pricing. Sometimes that means cutting price, but many times it actually means you can increase price for customers that are really heavily leveraging your product and getting value out of it. And then maybe just one final piece to call out. The go-to-market plays in particular, they found out that companies who did these scalable go-to-market plays were actually 3 times more likely to be in that top tier group than to be in the bottom one.
So Brian, I think that's really interesting, right? And I'm sure for some folks, sort of outside of marketing in particular, it's a bit counterintuitive to say, investing when things are tough actually yields higher growth. What would you say if, as a CMO, trying to make this sort of case to your CFO, your CEO, your board, what are some of the things you would advise a marketing leader to do to make sure that, the company doesn't end up hurting its growth potential when it could actually be accelerating it?
Yeah, and it's certainly a tough one, because how do you convince sort of your CFO who's needing to cut cost or wanting to cut cost how to do that effectively? And I think we're maybe the way that we've been trying to do it is you need to be really thoughtful about demonstrating, hey, this particular pot of money, this is who we're going to go after, and this is the returns that we're getting, and ideally doing it in a way that can clearly articulate that value. And so, for example, we've been running a sort of a test, now we're doing more broadly, of how to improve pipeline acceleration. And so what we did is we identified a cohort of customers that we were going to go after, different types of messaging. And actually the way that we got at that messaging was listening. Chorus is a tool that ZoomInfo has that allows you to listen to your customers' calls. We pulled out key themes and we plugged that into the messaging. And then the third piece we did is we tested across different channels. And we found out that not only does the messaging holistically, but specifically certain kinds of messaging, specific kinds of channels allowed us to really improve our conversion, our time to conversion, our average deal size. And those types of activities enable you to go to your CFO and say, this is actually where we want to double down and invest, because we are seeing returns, versus the control segment where we did nothing.
I love that you're using Chorus in that way. I think it is an incredibly powerful tool. Call recording and analysis gives you just gold for messaging. Who on your team is doing that? Or I'm just curious to know how you're operationalizing the use of Chorus for that kind of outcome.
Sure, yeah, and we tend to use it in a lot of different ways, including Henry, our CEO, mentioned that's one of the things he does when he thinks about M&A is he listens to who our potential customers are talking about. But the way that you can do it, and I'm sure potentially with other providers as well, but at least I know within ours, is you can set up searches. And so it sets up a Boolean search, and we would say, when people are mentioning the economy, what are other topics that are coming up? And then we pull that directly in. Also, something you can do from a play perspective and thinking about how to create scalable activities is, if someone mentions this competitor, or if someone mentions this, trigger this type of outreach, whether it's across email or maybe an outreach to sort of a seller or sort of particular media to the company. But yeah, there's both the manual ways to do it, but also to actually embed it directly within plays, which we found to be pretty impactful.
You bring up plays here, and I'm going to share my screen on a couple slides that we were talking about earlier, and maybe you could walk us through kind of the definition and what you're seeing in terms of trends there with plays, because I think that's a pretty topical moment for marketers right now. Is we're all thinking about plays, but nobody really knows like what does good look like here? And I don't know if you have a point of view on that in addition to the definitions.
To the definition, yeah, sure. And this was sort of our attempt to encapsulate really what a play is, because I think sometimes plays may be more known on the sales side. Sometimes in marketing we think about them as integrated campaigns, but this idea of a go-to-market play is something that sort of ideally spans sales and marketing, that it's coordinated, it's repeatable, ideally it's automated, and it has a very, very clear outcome that you're driving towards, and hopefully can be then used across companies. In fact, for those who haven't seen it, and we can share the link out afterwards, we've taken our top 100 plays and put it into a book that others can use. Those are the ones that we found have been most valuable. But in terms of the key pieces, so first and foremost, you need to have a really clear understanding of what you are trying to achieve, and if you're doing it across sales and marketing, what you're collectively trying to achieve. So what is that goal or sort of mission that you're shooting for? Second, and tying back to what we've already talked about, that data-driven view of the world is so critical, because you need to know who you're going after, but also sort of what way you want to go after them based on what you know about them as at a company or sort of an individual level. So that's really, really important. The third piece, potentially intuitive, but really key, is what are those key triggers that are going to set off those plays? And probably very to some extent by company to company, but we've seen a lot of consistency across our customers of there are certain activities of, a basic example. You have a company that comes to the website. What are the things you want to do to follow up? You could trigger your salesperson through a Slack notification. You could have a follow-up ad going out to sort of a broader set of the buying committee there. What are those triggers that you want to consider? Then the next pieces are around what are the set of activities across channels and what's the cadence of those activities, so that you make sure you understand what's happening next and it's not a sort of a one-off motion that potentially misses the opportunity to follow up. And then probably most important, but we put it last, is the content that actually goes into it. It needs to be relevant if you're really wanting to get people to respond, and that relevance to the company and individuals is key. And then John, you'd asked about sort of potential like impact and what we've sort of seen work well. As I mentioned, those top 100 plays that we called out, those are the ones that we've seen greatest return on. And again, they're available if you want to take a look, just because we thought it was good to get that out into the wild where we're seeing success.
Got it. And maybe just a follow-on question. We were talking, I think, earlier about the categories of plays here, and you've got a couple categories outlined here, which you're calling kind of ABM. And it's interesting how you break apart the one-to-many as go-to-market as opposed to ABM. How are you seeing that, or what, especially on the one-to-many, because I know a lot of marketers, it's a real gray area of one-to-many versus demand gen. How do you break that apart as ABM's not versus ABM is?
Yeah, and it came up actually in both of the conversations a little bit. I thought funny, if you think of ABM and you ask a marketer, are you doing ABM? I think many of us would be embarrassed to ever say, no, we're not doing ABM. But at the same time, I think sometimes we can be a bit embarrassed when people say, well, what is the measurable value you're getting from the ABM programs you're doing? Just because there's some inherent limitations in sort of traditional ABM programs, and where we're seeing a lot of value and moving more towards go-to-market plays and driving those efforts. So let me define them and then sort of explain what I mean. So traditionally, ABM has been much more of a one-to-one motion. Normally, hopefully sales and marketing are working together to define those. Not always the case, but hopefully everyone's working together. But it's normally on a sort of a static list of accounts. We figure it out at the beginning of the year, and then we run with it, and we hope they work. But normally that selection of the accounts can determine the entire impact of your program, because if you get the wrong few, you're sort of in a tough spot. Normally the way companies think about it is it's first around what are the customers, then what are we going to do? It's very customized, and there's normally human involvement. And so there's just a limitation of how much you can scale those programs. And so I think increasingly marketers talk about this idea of scaled ABM or potentially go-to-market plays. And that's what I'll talk a little bit more about, which is you figure out sort of the criteria that you care about, which includes companies, but the companies can shift over the course of the year. And inevitably, as part of that, you're going after more companies, because you're trying to get sort of scale while you're doing the targeting. The way you think about it is first, like, what are those sets of activities? And then how do companies fit into those sets of activities or workflows? And so it's a different orientation. And then the idea around personalization or targeting, again, is within the context of that play, how do you make sure that it's as relevant as possible? So companies have taken these actions, How do we then reach out and make sure that we're referencing them, the people, what we know about them? So like in our world, we have a lot of sort of information that our researchers pull up called scoops that we can say, oh, we know a new leader joined, or this happened in your business, you had an IPO, or you're doing an RFP or whatnot. But those types of sort of specific details can then be incorporated. And then the real key is to make it automated. So when that action happens, you immediately follow up with the appropriate behaviors. And again, citing some research and where we've seen this to be true as well. Google now the past couple of years has done research on this topic. Last year it was ComScore, this year is actually with Bain. And what they found is that when companies are getting into the buying process, 90% of the time they actually have a sort of a day one list, as they would call it, the companies they're considering. And roughly about 2/3 of the time, it's actually one company. And then over 90% of the time, they're choosing from either that day one list or that initial company. And so the idea of being incredibly timely in your outreach is really, really important. Otherwise, you sort of lost the opportunity. And so that's what really the scalable component of go-to-market plays enables, but it also allows you to get broader reach. And then, of course, if you want to be doing ABM programs that are super targeted on top of that, you can. But it does allow you to sort of increase your odds and sort of improve just overall effectiveness of your outreach. Reactions to anything I just said? I know that was a mouthful.
No, it makes sense. I always like the distinction of sort of scaled versus non-scaled as account-based marketing versus marketing to accounts, right? And with account-based marketing, you are doing something different based on the specific situations of those accounts that you are reaching out to, versus on the marketing to account side, you're really thinking about what do I know in general about companies of this size and type and the personas that I'm engaging, and how can I use that to have, message that's targeted and offers that are relevant and engagement that's meaningful, but you're doing it based on some assumptions versus like direct primary knowledge. And I think to your point, both are really relevant, and it's actually a lot easier for marketing to deliver on the marketing to accounts part, especially if you have a small team. And that's, I think, one of the things that's hard when you're communicating about account-based marketing, initially, is that conversation about, wait, isn't this going to be really, really hard to scale? And you can talk about those nuances of, well, this is what one-to-many looks like. This is what one-to-one, this is what one-to-few, but helping, people understand the impact and the distinctions there. Sometimes it gets to be a little too inside baseball, I think, but at the same time, there's a home for all of them in pretty much every business. So I'm with you there, and I like how you've laid that out, kind of go to market versus account based. And I would just say, yeah. What are your thoughts though?
Yeah, we're going to add something to that, because I think there's actually like a middle space between those two. So like a lot of what we'll do sort of internally, but also what our platform allows for our customers to do, is you can be actually very individualized in your messaging by using plays and sort of workflows. And maybe a little bit more detail, but on sort of types of data. I think many times we think of data as like descriptive data. Oh, you're a company above a certain size, you're a certain industry. You have this many people. There's sort of two other pieces that I think are really important that allow you to be much more targeted in what you're going to do. So one is like calculated fields. So for example, for us, if a company has a certain ratio of sales ops to sellers or marketing ops to sort of marketers, we know that they're potentially better suited for our product. So again, using descriptive information, but calculating. And then the third piece is really sort of custom attributes. And so an example, and it's sort of up on our website, Stripe is a customer, they use very custom attributes that are specific to them that enable them to know this company is more likely to do this or that. And then collecting all of those things together, you can actually be very, very specific in what you say to Bob at company A through your outreach, and you can actually personalize it all in real time. And so it feels like an account level activity, but it's done at scale. And so I would say that that's just sort of, to me, in between ABM and true sort of like the marketing to accounts is where we're seeing a lot of that go-to-market play value.
Yeah, just wanted to double click into what you mentioned on the first side. I'm not sure I followed it completely. Are you saying in that calculated field, is it like looking at the buyer's committee? In other words, how many marketers are associated to an opportunity? How many salespeople are associated to an opportunity? Or are you looking at the raw opportunities, or maybe it's something completely different?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, so I mean, it could be any host of things. So the way that we would think about it is hopefully in sort of your database, you have first and third party data, and you have a host of different sort of columns of information. And that's sort of like the set descriptive information. The calculated fields is really any combination of those that you are calculating. So the example that I gave was, you may know how big the company is, you may know how big the sales department is, you may know how many sales ops folks are there. It's understanding the ratio between those in sort of that example. So that would be it was just sort of a tangible example.
Got it.
But normally, if you get into some of those details, you'll find certain ratios make more sense to sort of you and sort of what you're trying to sell to your customers.
So I'm curious, you mentioned sort of first party, third party. A lot of companies are moving towards trying to have more first party data, just because we know with all the privacy regulations and other things that are, great for us as individuals and consumers, but they certainly make life a little more challenging for marketers and for sellers. I'm interested to know what you're seeing in terms of how companies are developing and embracing that first party data. Any suggestions for people who are trying to head in that direction?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and definitely we see companies trying to leverage both. I think obviously everyone is wanting to be thoughtful about privacy and protecting information. We actually haven't found that to be as much of an issue on the third-party side, just because what we are doing is privacy compliant, and so we actually see even more demand for third-party data. But there is at the same time a movement to really make sure you're understanding your customers, you're pulling all of that information together in a consistent place, and potentially enriching it with third-party data. But it does enable you to focus on the people that you want to go after, and potentially do additional channels such as marketing outreach where you can't do sort of that third party engagement. But in terms of sort of broader themes, really what we are seeing is companies want to focus on how are they managing that privacy appropriately? How are they pulling that data together? Just because a practical reality is normally about 30% of your first party data is going stale every year. Just because there's so much movement. And so it was actually one of our customers referred to it as, I can either be building out my sort of my cities with data, or I can start with the universe of data. And it's much easier to start with the universe of data and back in. And so my sense is the solution is, how do you leverage both of those things together so you're incredibly rich first party data with the universe of third party data that you can go after.
And I know we're always about education here, and we're approaching the bottom of the hour here. Just a quick kind of a plug, the Scoops capability. I know for our clients, they have found that particularly valuable on the Sales OS side. I'm a little bit slow on the uptick. I didn't realize that Zoom had such capabilities on the Marketing OS side. Is there a Scoops-like type capability on the Marketing OS, meaning the ABX platform capability, that people are like, wow, this is really, really, like game changer for a marketer?
Yeah, so sort of a broader answer to the question than more specific. So, and before I joined ZoomInfo about 5 months ago, I actually wasn't fully aware of our marketing capabilities as well. But if you think of everything we can do on the sales side, sort of that breadth of data at the company, contact, technographic, and intent level, and think about it, creating those audiences and marketing that you can then use directly in your advertising platforms and actually advertise at the individual level across our DSP, Facebook, LinkedIn, and then also use it for scoring for accounts and individuals. That's what John's referring to. But yeah, that same set of data that you would use on the sales side is available on the marketing side. And so it's incredibly powerful. And actually, when I was referring to that sort of test that we were running, a lot of pretty much what we were doing was ingesting all that data into the marketing side and then actually triggering it across our different media channels at the individual level, because we do have our own DSP. So yeah, it's equally available, and it's a lot of fun to use.
Awesome, great. Megan, any closing thoughts here as we're wrapping up the hour or a half hour?
Well, I've certainly found this to be super helpful, and I really like how you're thinking about the different motions that we should be considering as marketing and demand leaders, and really putting thinking about how to be as efficient as we can be, especially when we go into an environment where we're going to be challenged to fight for those budget dollars. Being able to point to things that will help a company grow seems to me like about the best message you could have these days. So thank you, Brian, for the great content and the great ideas, and for joining us.
Yeah, certainly. And for any of those who are watching that are interested in following up, it's just my first name dot last name at zoominfo.com. Happy to answer any additional questions.
We'll drop some of the great content that you shared with us here in Zoom and the YouTube channel as well afterwards. So terrific content. And thank you, Brian, for engaging with us this morning. I know it's a little bit earlier there. And yeah, next week, Megan, I think we have one of your quote unquote old peers back in the serious days.
Yeah, we have Jennifer Ross joining us. She's just started a new CMO role, or recently started a new CMO role, I should say. She's going to talk with us a little bit about her experience